understanding of the way the society evolved over the last 100 years is basically that the early missionaries going out were trying to promote and develop an understanding of Christ and Jesus and God and of the Christian faith. But their encounters in Asia soon led them to realize that there had to be an openness to listening and learning and understanding other peoples. So the whole area of dialogue became the first great change in Columban ethos and spirituality.
Columbans were unusual for Irish missionaries in that they went mainly to Asia as opposed to Africa. And in Asia you had major world religions like Buddhism and Islam, which were well established, and that Columbans had to come to terms with what was the challenge for them in dealing with that. And what they learned was a process of dialogue, of understanding how people try to make sense of their lives together, was the way forward.
Later then, as the Columbans moved into South America, when they began to meet with the communities in South America, they realized that in order to continue their work, they had to help these communities in the whole area of providing the necessary facilities like education and even clean water. The area opened up into what we now call justice and peace work, working with the poor, working with the marginalized, and helping them.
The whole realm of being missionary is to create a welcoming situation whereby dialogue can take place and people can feel a sense of belonging.
The third great change in Columban ethos or spirituality was when the questions began to be asked about how are we living on this planet and how are we caring for the earth itself. And of course, we really are, as humans, we're falling down badly in that whole area. So an investigation and I suppose realization that if God created everything, then everything is equal in God's eye, and we need, as humans, to care for the earth and to care for creation as part of our natural way of living on the planet. And that whole area then became the great new movement, the great new spirituality, the new cosmology it's often called. And Columbans would be very, very much at the forefront of that development.
Where we are here is where it's called the Old Dalgan. So it's the place where the Columban Foreign Missionary Society started. And it started here because it was the only place I think they could get, really. And it became, they were here till 1939 or sometime. I think the house was already there, but what they did is they added on cabins. So in other words, because they didn't know early on how many they'd get. Actually, you couldn't predict how many students would actually arrive or turn up any given year. And my understanding is that as they got more and more students, they built more and more. Until 1941, they were here.
It was an educational community in which students and professors respected one another as equals, and education was living and lived.
The living was very basic until they moved up to Dalgan. The Old Dalgan then went into mythology when we arrived up in Meath, because there was a different property entirely, and the college, as you know yourself, is very, very big in that.
Well, 100 years ago, there was a different kind of spirit in Ireland from today. Like you had, I think, a community spirit of struggling for equality and justice and some various kinds of independence. And what happened here then would be something that would be related to that movement.
Between 1918 and 1941, 333 priests and brothers went from this actual place to the various mission countries that we worked in. And then, as I said, in 1941 we moved up there.
insurgent Ireland of the early days of the century produced an extraordinary number of remarkable Irishmen. Imbued with the spirit and the courage and the heroism of the New Ireland, these poets and revolutionaries, statesmen, nation builders, all left their imprint on Ireland and on the world. John Blowick belonged to that extraordinary generation.
Well, we're very proud of the Blowick family here in Belcara, and in particular proud of Father John Blowick. He was a native son, reared locally here.
Very friendly, kindness, you'd love to see him come, and he was lovely. And very entertaining with children and everybody, like great, always all the time talking and telling his stories and telling where he was and all of that, like very entertaining. The day would fly really now. And if people came in and all of that, they used to love listening to him. He'd be always talking about his travels and who he met and all of that, like, you know.
He was an extraordinary man in many ways. He had little eccentricities, but those were part of it. Father Luke Riley, for the 1970 chapter, wrote a paper on the charism of the society. And he said that he was very friendly with Father John, and he used to go into him and he'd say, "Father John, you gave us a great start." And Father Blowick would return, "No, I did not. It was the Holy Spirit who did it." And I heard him saying that. But Luke Riley would said that he believed that when it came to the dealing with the society, that Father John had a special charism. He had a special grace, especially sometimes, at other times it could be a little bit eccentric, but in planning the society, he had a tremendous vision for formation. Completely different from anything that was going anyplace else. While he was in Maynooth, he wanted to get rid of the students versus the staff, to get rid of them. We want to get one up on you, that is it, if we can possibly do it. And his trust then, he believed he could trust the students.
So I remember going from Charles up to Dalgan playing a football match. They had a very good team, Dalgan had, some county players, but we kind of beat them that day. My cousin was playing against me, and Father Brendan. But we noticed the atmosphere there was totally different to even secondary school, and certainly was totally different to Maynooth. There was a freedom, there was a joy, there was a responsibility. People seemed to take charge of themselves, and they weren't subjected to this terrible over your shoulder looking. And of course that was great preparation for the mission.
I look back and over 100 years and I try to visualize the thinking of the people of the time, like John Blowick and people like that, who were perceptive enough to see that the end of empire was coming, and a new world of nation state was emerging, beginning here in this country in 1916, 17, 18 and 19. And as he himself said, to question the status quo and to question the culture of the day and what would be countercultural with the Christian message put into it. That's what I see over 100 years, and the variations that took, the ups and downs and the pain and the suffering, and also the ecstasy as well that happened over 100 years.
With Corkman Ned Galvin and a few dedicated young Irish priests, he set himself no less a task than the conversion of China.
Here is Bishop Galvin chatting with the young missionary and one of his native Chinese priests. Bishop Galvin has been in China since 1912.
Edward Galvin, as a young priest, went to China, was there for 4 years. While he was there, he continually wrote to people in other countries, telling them about China, the huge needs in the country, the poverty, the environmental situation in terms of flooding, and Gradually, that led to a great build-up of interest in China among people that he was connected with.
He is known and respected far and wide for his great mission work.
Well, he has always been a figure in our life. He was one of the people that everybody spoke about. My mother called him Uncle Edward, but for some of her family he was so important he was always referred to as the bishop. And I knew him as Uncle Edward as well. We always heard stories about him growing up and how he was gone to China, and as young children we actually didn't even know where China was. We knew the Columbans because they visited us frequently, and we were impressed that he was out in a foreign country.
The 1931 flood relief provided an opportunity for Bishop Galvin to invite young women to work with him. That eventually became the basis upon which a new diocesan group of sisters was founded in the late 1930s.
In 1988, I got to Hanyang, and I was anxious to find out about the Bishop Galvin sisters. And I asked the ladies in the room there, you'll see the picture, and nobody wanted to tell us about these nuns or that they even existed. But finally, one of the ladies found the sisters and we met them. And it was so emotional meeting those nuns, both for them and for us.
Brothers that I had met here in Dalgan, all of them dedicated to their particular skills that they had. You know, self-effacing men, people who really took their vocation to be a brother as very, very, very important. That was their life, whether it was with the hands, whether it was the electrical stuff, whether it was carpentry with Brother Coleman, Brother Michael, and so on. So I was very sad to see the numbers that obviously, whatever it was about the Columban brothers, very, very few followed, I think, into the 1940s, as far as I know. But they were a bunch of men that certainly I looked up to with great admiration.
I was here for about a year and a half, maybe 2 years. And I can guarantee you it wasn't easy in the early periods of time, but I got on very well with all the students here. I remember coming here and I met Father Brennan here, and my mother was elated. She was very happy to see me going to devote my life to God with the Columban Fathers. We were given a week's leisure of freedom to get to know each other, and it was wonderful. And I know then that I wanted what was offered to me here at the Columban Fathers. And I really and truly wanted to be a religious brother, to be a member of the Columbans. And being a brother just meant, you know, to do the will of God.
The brothers that we're talking about now, for me anyhow, they were an integral part in those early years, but perhaps because they weren't teachers like in the schools like the De La Salle and Christian Brothers and so on, they weren't too well known to the wider world. As I said earlier, I was sorry to see that they didn't grow in numbers, but I think it was just the times that were in it. Nobody obviously wanted to follow, and they did their work, as far as I'm concerned, with great devotion and dedication. And certainly as they began to die off, the society, I think, lost very important people in the mission.
And there was a poem in one of the Far East there by Father Patrick O'Connor, and the title was There are hearts that wait for guidance where the Yangtze waters roll. And then he asked various questions, and can a boy say no to the call? Can a girl say no to the call? So actually, I suppose this remained with me all those years, and I decided I was going to China, even though China was closed, but I was going.
Mission is everywhere in the sense that all Christians, all Catholics are Catholics everywhere they go. But obviously it's being a missionary trying to share your message is going to be a difference from here in Ireland or in a place like China or Korea. There's cultural and languages difference and the whole background, and it's going to stretch your imagination to work in those different cultures. So to prepare to be a missionary overseas is completely different. You have to have a different training, a different outlook. So while the basic issue of sharing a message everywhere is the same, but obviously in a different culture.
But I think overall, the men did a tremendous amount of work. Even my experience in the Philippines, looking back at the men that went there first, all the men that went to the Philippines first, the conditions were terrible that time. I mean, physically, everything, and the hardship that they endured, and especially during the Japanese invasion. But in nearly every country, they went through terrible trials. But they left a great mark, I think, any place they were, and they were generally very well received and respected and loved by the people.
I grew up knowing that our parish was being run by Columban Missionaries, and we didn't realize that they were from Ireland, of course. Before, we thought that all the priests in the Philippines were from the US or from America because they're all tall, white, and with blue eyes. When I was in primary school, our parish priest was Father Patrick Dugan from Bal in County Mayo. And so when I had my first communion, he was our parish priest. And I often remember I was so terrified before having my first confession, of course. And he was there letting us know that don't worry, that would be okay. And my memory of him was that he's like somebody who was from other country, that he was tall and always wearing the soutane. And we often see him walking around the church, praying the rosary. So he's almost like the image of Jesus. So that's what I have in mind, like remembering him during my primary school. So he was a great kind of image for us of somebody who looks after our parish at that time. Like since 2009, I've been a member of the mission promotion team. That means this is the group of Columbans who do mission promotion and mission appeal. So every year we have 2 dioceses to do. Like this year, we are in Kilmore Diocese and also in Limerick. So that means visiting the parishes and speaking at Mass and talking about the work of the Columban Missionaries. And of course, the main thing is for them to be part of the Columban mission by subscribing to the Far East magazine. As you all know, the Far East magazine has been the work of the Columbans, where they share the stories of people, and of course, stories that are inspiring, that people would know that God is always present in the lives of the people, especially those who are marginalized and oppressed in the society. So that's the kind of work that we do.
My high school days in the Philippines, the chaplains are Columban priests. So I was involved in the student council. They call it student council. We're very active, in, let's say, for example, there are typhoons. We provide some help to the victims. So from then on, I learned the Columban Missionaries. They have also the how do you call this, the magazine, the lay mission magazine of the Columban. So I'm reading all this information. That's the one thing that influenced me, seeing that these priests are very much involved in social justice issues back in my own country.
We have this program called the CFC, China Formation Committee, to help Chinese priests or religious sisters and even lay people to come to oversee study theology. More and more people, I believe, will know Columban Fathers working in China and their contribution. We're really indebted to Columban Fathers Society that they sent missionaries to China and planted the seed of gospel in the land of China.
Today, you know, it's wonderful to see so many young priests and women over here in China, over here in Ireland, in education institutes and universities, and being trained and ready to go back again to China. And this, in ways, is the continuation of our original mission in China.
When I first went to the Philippines and then Pakistan, I thought I had all the answers. But I realized that God was certainly there before my arrival, and we have been touched very much by the cultures. And I wanted to say, take this opportunity as we approach the Centenary of thanking the people from the various cultures of China, the Philippines, Korea, and the other countries where we work in Latin America, and to thank them for, you know, welcoming us, taking us as we are.
The sole greatest achievement of the society, I think it was to go through that period and there was a very special 100 years in the history of the church, and to respond to all the different questions, the different challenges that came up during that time, and then finally to pass on the baton, you could say, now that we have no local vocations in Ireland or in the Western world, to pass on this spirit and these challenges to a younger generation from in other countries like Korea and the Philippines and Chile, Peru.
One of the great strengths of the Columbans, that coming from an emerging nation like Ireland, we were basically third world from a long time back, and coming from that situation and going to situations of a similar nature, we were able to relate to people in those situations.
I think, first of all, the great achievement of the Columbans in the last 100 years has been their openness to change, to grasp the latest technologies and the latest inventions, if you want to call it that, to help them continue their mission. Hand in hand with that has been their willingness to question what they're actually saying and doing, and to be willing to work with people in all different ways.
As a woman working for the Columban Missionaries, for the Columban Fathers, I think it's great to reflect and to see how they started out as one thing, an order of ordained priests, by nature male priests, and over the years they have become very involved with lay people, empowering lay people and empowering women and men that are not joining up with the religious life to get involved in their work. And I think that's, for me, from my point of view, I guess, as a woman and as a lay woman, to be encouraged by an organisation, to be empowered by them and to be employed by them, I think shows their commitment to the broader church, a wider picture of what they see as church and leadership and ministry. So I think the Centenary is a great time to celebrate all that.
So, I mean, 100 years is a long time, and I suppose it's a sort of a longer time than it used to be because change is so rapid. And I think the challenge for Columbans and those of us who are involved with the Columbans is to take those lessons that have been learned, those lessons about how we all share the same planet, how we all draw in different ways on our faith traditions to give us resources to try to make the world a fairer, more ecologically responsible world. How we work to hand that on in new ways to people, because one thing that is clear to all of us is that the old ways of doing things can't continue, nor should they. So our challenge is to take those core messages and experiences that people have had and hand them on to people in a way that new people will take them up.
The confidence that was there, say, in 1916 is not there in 2016. But that doesn't mean that the work itself shouldn't carry on. It just means that we'll have to, it'll be carried on in a different way. And nowadays, if you look at them, I mean, I remember when I went to Korea, it was a very poor country and a very small church. And now it's a first world country and it has a big Christian population, and they are actually sending out more missionaries now than Ireland are, and will continue to do so. So that's a big change. For the good, I think. I really do believe that, for the good.
What's needed is just the new ways of putting the faithfulness itself needs to be brought up to date. It needs a whole new intellectual, different kind of underpinning.
I suppose the message we've got ourselves from here is that God is with us all the time, even in the worst of times. In our pilgrim journey, God is with us. So the Columbans are going through a pilgrim journey. It's all a journey, and to have hope and faith in Him. He will not let them down, just as He didn't let down the people in their pilgrim journey through the desert. So it's to keep faith with the purpose and the vocation and the call that they have been given, and still will have in the years to come.
The Spirit is still guiding us. So I think that is 100 is bringing us to forward, and hopefully more people, hopefully the young people.
Now we arrive at 100 years later for the Columban Fathers and 95 years for the Columban Sisters. And as we look back, we praise and thank the Lord for all that, whatever bit we have been able to achieve, and also for all that we are very grateful for all that we have learned from the people that we were with. So I wish all my confreres, the Columban Sisters and the Columban Fathers, God's blessing, and that we may go forward with trust in the Lord, because that is what we are built on. We trust that the Lord is with us.
Congratulations, well done on your marvellous work in so many countries. You've had an influence on so many people, both at home and abroad. And for the future, I just wish that the mission will keep going in whatever way God decides.
From myself and from all the Blowick family, I wish you the 100th anniversary of the founding of the mission, the Columban Missions, and I hope they'll be around for the next 100 years.
I'd like to say a particular thanks to the people of Ireland for their generosity over the years in supporting us. I must say they have, to this day, they have continued to support us, and we are deeply grateful. And I would like to see them as very much our partners in mission. And it's been good to be a part of the Columban Society, but it's so important to give thanks, not only to God, but to the generosity of the people of Ireland.
The goodwill and the great achievements that they have, that those, the memories and the knowledge of those themselves, and what changes that the Columbans are achieving at the moment in world attitudes and so on, maybe that's the legacy. It's hard to know. All you can do is live in the moment. I think one of the great quotes is from Bishop Galvin, that you never know for 24 hours ahead exactly what God is going to ask you to do. In other words, you have to take what's on your plate on the day and work with that, and let the future look after itself. Let God look after the future.
So please God, God will be with us. We will continue the work. We will do our best, and we will continue to pray for vocations and for the future of the society, and that the Columbans, there will still be Columbans in another 100 years' time.